going to be talking about is application development and tools. So making your solution accessible. We are going to be touching upon some aspects about posting your students' work, also sharing recorded versions of your student work in terms of the application functionality, and then kind of just some tips and tricks about doing this for the past couple years. Now, I will say that there are certain aspects in here that I'm going to be touching upon that are kind of general, mostly because we don't really have the time to go into any of these resources in depth. And also, I'm just going to be referring to Thelma kind of back and forth, mostly because there were some changes over the years for the past 3 years that we've participated in the hack. So Thelma would be a great resource to just ensure that whatever I am telling you is indeed accurate. So yeah, like I said, Mill Line High School, my team has competed for the past, what happened to my Zoom window? For the past few years. Oh, sorry, my window just went away.
You can play. You can play.
Oh, sorry. Give me 1 second. My Zoom window disappeared. Okay, I don't know where the video went, but just let me know in the chat if something goes wrong. But yeah, so we've participated in the past 3 years, and so I'm just hopefully going to be able to lend some insight to everybody about what that experience was like. If you guys have any questions during this entire thing, please let me know. Yeah, if you were here yesterday, you know that it can get pretty tedious if I just keep talking. So just don't be afraid to ask me a question. To hear someone else's voice would probably be very refreshing. All right, so let's go. All right, so the first thing that we're going to be talking about today is the uploading process and describe solution and team process. And the specific thing I'm going to be just kind of mentioning is going to be DevPost. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is deploying solutions to platform of choice, and primarily just kind of some tips about Git and GitHub. And finally, the last step was going to be the video capture for technical review, which is required for all your students' entries. So just, yep, that's going to be what we're going to be mentioning. And here we go. All right, so if you haven't participated in the hack before, there is a possibility that maybe you have participated in some other hackathons that span within the smaller groups of the state, or even actually the nation at large. DevPost is basically a resource where you can kind of network with other people to work on projects that are dedicated to another hackathon. It provides you with tools such as communication, grouping in terms of teams, and it also enables you to post up work and notes and all that sort of thing that goes along with the hackathon territory. DevPost, so I'm not sure if I can, let me see here. Where is my dev post? Oh, okay, I don't have it open. But if we have time in the end, I can kind of just show you guys some of the dev post stuff. Okay, but yeah, so DevPost it's a pretty smooth experience. A lot of the categories are self-explanatory. Just a couple tips though, when you're actually using DevPost for a hack. The first thing is that all members who participate must make an account. So for me personally, what happens throughout the years is you have a lot of students that are a little bit shy about, you know, hack being a very ambitious project that involves a lot more intense work and critical thinking than most things that are done that can be done throughout the normal school day. So there's a lot of people who are kind of scared to like put their stamp, like their name on the project, because they're like, oh, what if the project doesn't turn out very good, or what if we do a bad job? I don't want my name attached to that. That's going to be terrible. So some students do try, and they tend to not put their name on it, or they try and keep their name off of it as much as possible because they don't know where the outcome is going to be, right? But just one thing to make sure for everybody who does participate, your name does have to be linked to the dev post of the project in order for you to be associated with the team. I don't know this for 1,000% certainty, but I can imagine, right? Because this is something that would be much reflected in a professional setting, is that you don't want to run into a problem where somebody has been a significant contributor to the work, or actually any sort of contributor to the work, and they're not cited for their work, right? Because that can cause a lot of logistical headaches down the road. So, you know, even if somebody is going to join the team and they anticipate that they can't give it their all, but they do want to help, just encourage them to make an account with the DevPost. Okay. The next thing after that is that advisors should also make an account, right? And this is also kind of important, mostly because, you know, for me in my situation, for example, when we first participated in HACC, my thinking was, oh, I don't really need to make a DevPost account because I'm just an advisor, right? I'm not actually going to be making any code. You know, I'm just here to be like the group's cheerleader slash mama bear, right? So I don't really need an account. Well, one thing to remember is that from HACC standpoint, they want to be able to make it as easy as possible to see who is linked to what project, right? So you having an account for DevPost and you linking your account to your particular team's project, logistically, I would imagine makes it a lot easier for everybody running the project. The second reason why this is very important is that it also enables you to have edit features and functions to see what is actually going up on the dev post, right? Now, for me as a high school teacher, right, you always have to be looking over your shoulder and be semi-paranoid that somebody is not trying to post up something that is either malicious or memey in nature, right? So you always kind of, you know, just do an audit here and there every once in a while. So having that DevPost account will enable you to have some sort of administrative functionality over your students' projects. All right, next thing. Now, this portion is going to be me just kind of advocating for the amount of time that should be dedicated to Git or GitHub. So in order for you to deploy your solution for HACC, you're going to have to upload your project to some sort of online repository, right? And GitHub is a really good place to start. So the one thing that I cannot stress more is the nuances and the learning curve that GitHub has at the very beginning of the process, okay? In years past, especially in that first year where my team completely crashed and burned, a lot of people took these simple things for granted, right? Everybody was so concentrated. Oh, yeah, so your IDE is basically your digital environment that you are programming in. So, you know, like idle, PyCharm, Scratch, right? So yeah, your IDE is basically your environment that you're programming in. Thank you, Thelma, for the question. Sorry. So basically what's going to happen here is that when you are done with your project, or when you are making significant changes to your project, you should be uploading your project up to GitHub. GitHub will archive everything for you. It will also hold all your code. And conveniently, what it'll enable you to do is to upload essentially your code, download your code, and you can do this basically wherever you have access to GitHub. So for high school teams, this is very, very ideal, mostly because this gives you a modus to work a little bit in school, go home, you know, take a little break, open up your code at your home, upload it, right? Come back to school and work on it again. It gives you this ability to have a very productive workflow that will minimize the amount of problems that most people run into because they're like saving something to a flash drive, they lose the flash drive, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reason why I'm saying that GitHub does take its own time is that it's very specific in the way that it works, right? So GitHub is not like Google Docs where you can just drag and drop a file into a cloud and everything saves and everything's like, you know, just fine. GitHub is command driven to a certain degree. So you have to give your students some time to be trained upon the commands they need to use, working with the interface, especially if they're working with the command line interface version of GitHub. And also, you're going to want them to understand the functionality and the kind of procedural ways that you have to push an update or pull an update. Because like I said, it's not like Google Drive where you just drag and drop something in. So for me personally, what I've kind of noticed is that 1 week of training and practice is probably almost mandatory in order for people to understand how to use the platform. Okay. Um, One of the things that a lot of students are very worried about when they start using Git or GitHub, right, is that they get really worried that they're going to be the guy to actually destroy the entire repository, right? They're like, oh, what if I put in the wrong command and like I delete everything and everybody's work is gone, and they get real gun shy about trying to use it, right? So my one thing is that, well, first thing, like I said, a lot of practice and training is going to be necessary to get them comfortable using it. If you go online and look for like GitHub tutorial, I didn't put a specific one here because there's a lot of them out there that actually do really cool structured things where you are essentially uploading and downloading files that don't really have any sort of importance, but they're having you use these files and doing all the functionality to it so people get real comfortable using them. So that way, when it comes to a high stakes project where they actually have to upload something that they care about, they're used to the pattern already. They're used to the syntax, so they don't have to worry about it. So you want to make really environment where people are comfortable and be reassured that they're not going to destroy their entire group's work. Okay. The next thing, especially with high school students, is that you have to tell them to push or upload their code as often as possible with comments. Okay. The reason why is that one, iteration in coding is extremely important, right? If you make any sort of significant progress in your code, or you're going to try something experimental, you're going to always want to save your program in iterations, versions 0.51, 1.52, 2.5, et cetera, so that way if something goes wrong, you have older code to go back to work from, rather than just deleting everything and starting all over, right? Hack gives you a very small window of time for you to do your work. So you have to make sure you're utilizing that time efficiently. So iterations, saving iterations is so important. I cannot express enough the importance of getting people used to that. Of course, for me, the reason why I'm saying that is that my teams specifically are really bad at sometimes saving iterations of work, right? What will happen is that they get lost in their work and they'll be working on their code or script for hours. And then they figure out that they did something at the very end that doesn't work. And they're like, oh my gosh. And they're trying to delete things to get it to work again. But because they got so lost in their workflow, they were saving, but they weren't saving it as separate iterations, right? And so when you're trying to roll back to a working state, it makes it very, very inefficient on time. So like I said, if you push your code to Git very often, regularly, right, those incremental saves will be done for you. And hey, you know what? My code's really messed up now. I can just go to my Git and I can go and pull the another version of my code, and I can start working from there again. Now, this system is awesome with the caveat that your students are adding notation or comments to their code that will basically tell them, hey, this is the big change I made in this iteration of the code that I uploaded. The other problem I ran into last year was that people were uploading very frequently, but they took not even 15 seconds to add any comments to their Git entries. So when they had to try and find a working state of their program, they had to manually download things and look through the code and see if that was the version they wanted. 10 to 15 seconds of just adding some simple notation about, I added this in this iteration. I added this in this iteration, right? They could have just read it, download it, and just started working again. So yeah, the saving is important, but the comments and the notation is just as important when you upload on Git. All right. And the last thing I have on this slide, just as a pitfall for me doing this for a few years, your IDE, as Thelma said, the digital environment that you're working in, your Scratch environment, your PyCharm, your Sublime, those things, the actual program that you're using to code, you have to remember that the state of the IDE is important. So what do I mean by that? So I'm just going to give you an example. In Python, right? Python comes with a lot of out-of-the-box functionality, but there's tens of thousands of libraries and smaller programs that you can download and install in your IDE, so you have expanded functionality for Python, right? Now, the problem with this is that when students are working on a project, they'll be like, oh, for example, I want to use this program called Pandas to look through my database and organize my database. You can download and install Pandas into your Python IDE, right, into your computer, and you can use that functionality. Now, the problem here is that if a student the next day comes back to work on their project and they pull their file from the GitHub, right? If they're on a different computer than they were yesterday, that doesn't necessarily mean that that expanded functionality, that library they downloaded, installed on their IDE is on the computer they're working on today. So what will happen is that your student will run your code. Maybe they're like super excited and they want to show it off to their other group mates or their other dev teams, and it doesn't work. And they're like, oh my gosh, like what happened? My code was working yesterday. And they start going and deleting things out of their code or changing variable names. And lo and behold, that code is literally perfect. Nothing's wrong with it, but they just don't have the same libraries and resources installed in their computer. Yeah, thank you, Thelma. Integrated development environment. So what happens here is that essentially have your students just do a check, right? Like a temperature check before they start hitting the road running, right? Hey, sit down. Hey, is this computer I was using yesterday? If not, maybe I got to check my IDE to see that I have all the stuff installed. Okay, I have stuff, great. Now let me download my file. Let me pull my file from GitHub. Let me run it. Oh, does it work? Okay, perfect. I can start here. And then they can start working again, right? Kind of like just explain to your students, right? It's kind of like when, you know, like a pilot gets into, yeah, exactly, Sheila. I was literally just going to say that, right? Like when you get into an airplane, there's dozens of things that you have to check before you go and take off, no matter how excited you are to go flying, right? You got to make sure everything's there, everything's inventoried and checked off, good to go, and then you can be on your way, all right? Okay, any questions on anything that I've talked about up to this point? Everybody good?
I do want to make one comment for the participants. We do as part of the HACC DevPost and GitHub trainings. We had been discussing doing those in advance of the event this year, a pre-kickoff training, because we wanted to make sure that those two tool sets, which are so important to the system, are separate from, as Blaze was stating, they are a component that are very important tool sets, and therefore we want to give them some polish ahead of time and ability to practice. And I don't know if you're going to go into this, Blaze, but if you would mention as well or comment on, there's a distinctive difference between committing your code to a repository, which is what GitHub is. All that is there is your code. It doesn't function there. You have to take a second step of deployment. And that's like, you know, you could be sitting on your computer and you could be creating an HTML website, but if you don't tell it to upload into a folder where the rest of the world can see it, and you know, if that's what you want, it doesn't work. So just that should be mentioned at some point if you haven't already put that in. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, no, that's a really good point to bring up, Thelma, right? So even pushing your code up to GitHub, right? Like compiling it correctly, so somebody can just simply, you know, like a judge doing a technical review, for example, can just simply download that compiled file, that compressed file, and then essentially take it on their computer and run it. That's something that's very much overlooked sometimes as well, right? Because you'd have to imagine that your judges, your poor judges, right, that have to do the technical review, there's probably 20 to 30 projects that they're going to need to actually run and see how it works, right? So if you are kind of shortchanging your GitHub um, processes, let's say, right, you're just causing exponential issues for the judges, which makes the time window smaller for logistical things to happen, like actual scoring, comparison, thorough technical reviews, right? So you are literally holding up the system because you didn't do your homework, right? So Thelma, that's a really good point to bring up, which also, brings the importance of, as Thelma said, if there is training being provided for GitHub and DevPost, those are things you absolutely want your students to go and attend themselves, right, virtually. For me, I can definitely say that a lot of times what happens for students, because like I said yesterday, a lot of the students who are going to be interested in hack are ones that are doing other things, right? Robotics competitions happen on the weekend, right? Cyber Patriot competitions happen on the weekend. National History Day, soccer games, tennis, right? All these things happen on the weekend. And a lot of times the workshops will also happen, these educational workshops to help you use these tools kind of conflict on that same time. So students kind of put the optional trainings on the back burner to versus, this is a soccer game and I have to play or else my coach is going to get real mad or something, right? So with that said, all I'm trying to say is that the trainings that are put out to help students get better at understanding how HACC works, you should definitely advocate for them to go, and you should definitely encourage them and let them understand what the importance is. One thing I do want to add about, just students, sometimes the way they prioritize things is that a few years back, one of my students came back to visit me when he went to college, and he said, oh, Mr. Hanagami, thank you so much. Everything that you taught me helped me so much in my freshman year in computer science. And I was like, oh, he's probably going to talk about Python, and he's going to talk about, some of the cybersecurity stuff we did. He goes, you teaching me how to use Git basically saved me half a semester of stress. Because he said that his entire class, nobody knew how to upload their projects to even get reviewed by their professor. So they had to actually do additional research to teach themselves how to use Git. And he was like, oh, it was just a breeze for me and I could actually concentrate on my own work. So needless to say, my 4+ years of educating him, the only thing that stuck with him was Git. But nonetheless, yeah, a lot of people do tell me that, if there was one common skill they would like for students to come out outside of high school and either go to college or internship, using Git is one of the functions or one of the skills they are always looking for.
And be aware, because this is a virtual year, we are recording all training sessions. So if a student does, their soccer coach probably is right. They should be going to their game. Mm-hmm. But that means that then they will have that as a resource to review as a starting point on their own.
Yes, thank you, Thelma. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away about how much I care my students doing their work. Okay, all right. Now, this is going to be the last big portion thing I want to talk about, and then just going to some tips here at the very end. Okay, so your demo video, right? The process for people who haven't participated in the hack before, essentially what happens at the very end of your project being done, or right before it's submitted, you have to not only submit your code, but you have to also submit a technical display of your application running in real time, right? So what this is going to be is that it's going to be kind of a no frills video. Just the thing that you're concentrating on the most is showing your application running in motion. A to Z, start it up. This is what it does. Here's how you do this. Let me enter something in the character field. Let me hit submit. This is what my application does, right? You're taking the judges on a journey on this application running, right? So the thing you have to think about is that, number one, evidence that your application works. That is the most important thing you're trying to articulate and illustrate in this technical video, all right? Along with the video, your students are able to provide narration about what is happening in the particular program that they are submitting. So what you want to do is you want to have your students take a few hours to script out what they want to do, storyboard out what they want to show the judges, write out a script about the things that they want to narrate over the video while the program is running in motion, right? What I basically told my students is that if, and this is something that maybe Thelma and Sheila maybe you can ask them additional questions about, but my understanding is I was trying to put my perspective in as a judge. And I thought to myself, hey, if I want to see somebody's program running and working to verify that it actually runs the way it does and it does what they said it does, right? I don't want to see a lot of cuts, edits, screenshots in the video, right? Sure, I would want the video to be presentable, but I kind of want to see it run as a one long uncut session of that application running. The more editing I would see, the more I would be like, huh, that's weird. Why would they have to edit that when you click this button, it goes to this next window? Why couldn't they just click that button and show the window come up, right? Then it starts to raise questions or kind of make me a little bit suspicious about what's happening in the video. So maybe dissuade people from making a whole ton of edits to make it look pretty. Think more about, am I proving to people that this application works and behaves the way I said it does? All right. This process of also kind of narrating or designing a narrative and also planning out like the way that you are displaying your program will also help students think of possible things they want to talk about in either the presentation at the final day or the actual technical review. All right. Now, one thing I do want to say, just for some like inventory things, right? You're going to have to remember that there's a lot of third-party screen capture programs online that are free, right? So you can just have your program open and you can just use those. So the money sink isn't there. However, one thing that you are going to have is a microphone, maybe a headset, maybe it's some microphone that's lying around in the audio visual department at your school, but you're going to need a microphone that connects to your computer via USB or some technology, Bluetooth, what have you. And you're going to have to use that in order to provide narrative to your technical review video. Okay. Now, once that video is submitted, judges will be looking at your code and they'll watch your video, and then they're going to ask you to schedule a technical review appointment with them so they can kind of talk to you about your code, right? So the technical review is extremely stressful for students because they're like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to deal with a living, breathing judge one-on-one. All right. The first thing that you're going to have to remember is that you are able to have more than one person participate in the technical review. But remember, you also have to balance out the thing that you do not want to have too many chefs in the kitchen, right? Pick a handful of students, right? Pick a handful of students to go who really, really know the ins and outs of what was happening on an operational function, right? And what I mean by operational, I mean, they know who did what. They know the ins and outs. They were there for troubleshooting. They had to really wrestle with something to get it to work. Invite those students to participate in the technical review, but don't have the whole team, right? You don't want to make it very disorganized and seem shotgunish in nature in the way that you're answering the judges when they're asking you about your program. Okay. Video, the technical review is done via web conference. So it's not like you have to drive and show up somewhere. When you schedule that appointment, you just have to be available to chat with the judges using a web conferencing platform. Have a speaker and microphone ready and make sure they test their equipment. Last year, we were literally scrambling around 10 minutes before our appointment because one of my students who brought his microphone pulled it out of his bag and then realized that, oh yeah, well, actually the microphone doesn't work, the headphones work, right? So, needing a microphone to talk to the judges might be important, but he kind of didn't see that as necessary. So we had to go scramble around and try and find a microphone that we could use. So don't be that guy, all right? Logistical issues, and this might seem simple, but students, they always have they always kind of oversimplify their day, right? So, hey, can you do a technical review on Thursday, like at 3 o'clock after school? Yeah, that's fine. And then sometimes students would be like, oh, but I have a club meeting until 4 o'clock. Is that okay? Right? So you just want to make sure that when you schedule that time with the judges, you don't want to waste the judges' time, right? They have to do all the technical reviews they can in one day so they can start tabulating scores. So you want to make sure that everybody knows where and when they're supposed to be, right? And finally, last thing, practice, right? Do some mock technical reviews with your students. Ask them questions. Hey, can you show me how this works? Hey, can you show me the code of where this thing happens, right? Oh, that's an interesting way to do it. How come you decided to do it this way rather than that, right? If you quiz your students, right, it will help them infinitely be much more comfortable when dealing with the judge because they're hearing the kinds of questions, the the critical thinking questions that they're going to hear in real time before the actual thing. All right, now, technical review tips, a little bit more. The review verifies that this was developed by students. So they're going to ask your students questions, right, about who wrote this, how did this get written, what did the previous iteration look like, because they want to verify that the students actually did the work themselves, right? Now, this is absolutely second nature to people if you genuinely were a part of the entire process, right? So tell them don't stress out about that. The mindset to put your students in before the technical review is also very, very important. So here's the things I always tell my students. Your student should walk in confident. If there is ever going to be a time that they're going to brag and show off their hard work, it's right now, right? So now is not, and the technical review is not the time to be super modest and be like, oh, well, it just happened because I'm surrounded by good people, right? If you're the guy who actually wrote that, tell them about it. Don't feel like you're bragging about it, right? This is information. This is the information they showed up for, right? The one thing I always tell them, my students, is make sure the judges feel your pain. And what do I mean by that? So I tell my students going into the technical review this, look, you spent 2 weeks of backbreaking work, working on this meticulously, losing sleep over it, arguing with your group members, right? Finding resolution. You know what? Now is the time to tell the judges everything about the code. Tell them when they ask questions, give them such good responses and so detailed responses to their questions that they almost start to feel the amount of work that you have to put in. Share your pain, make them feel it, right? Make them feel the amount of effort and passion you have to put into this project by giving them really good responses. So if they ask you something about a portion of code, don't just give them one sentence. Tell them everything about it. Like, oh, hey, look, like this is what this at the beginning, we thought we could do this, but I had a discussion with my team and there was a conflict with this other team that, that this particular function wouldn't work this way. So we came to this resolution and I got this portion of the program and I had to iterate over it to get to this final product, right? Tell them about that journey, right? People want to know about these things. How did you get to that destination? All right. Last thing, the judges were very, very understanding. Like, shout out to the judges. I can only imagine how much work it was for them. But, like I said, my student had a broken microphone. We had to reschedule our technical review to a few hours later so his parents could drop off the mic from home. And they were super understanding. Even during the actual technical review, they were always about putting the students at ease, making them feel comfortable, kind of joking with them, keeping things lighthearted. So you have to remember that, the judges really want to see what your students did. They're not going to come in there with an adversarial sort of mindset, right? They were, I was kind of watching in the back, seeing what it looked like. And, my kids are smiling, they're laughing, like I could kind of see the judges on the web conference, they were smiling and laughing. So, it's kind of like a lighthearted thing. It's more of a celebration of what the program is rather than it's just like, okay, am I gonna pass you or am I gonna fail you, right? Don't go in with that mindset. Just think about, let me share this information. Let me share the journey with these guys if they ask me a question about it. All right. Any questions or comments or concerns about anything that I talked about? No? All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, everybody. That one was a little less intense than yesterday's one. Thelma or Sheila, did you have anything that you wanted to add to anything that I brought up today?
No, great job. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one more thing, right? Like I said, as Thelma mentioned before, please just have your students, if there is that sort of workshop to, help with skills to participate in hack or do managemental things like uploading your project and stuff, encourage them to at least watch the replay of the conference, right? There's so much information in there that, you know, you would not have to re-explain yourself if they just know where the resources are.
I do have something, Thelma.
Yes.
Thelma, if you can kind of go over like a quick, maybe just a minute or so of the overall process, right? The challenges come out, and this happens during the application. That you have to use GitHub and all the things that Blaze was saying for the last since the application development piece. Just a overview. I know we don't have a slide for that, but does that make sense?
Yeah. So we post the challenges 2 or 3 days prior to the event, as Blaze was saying, and that gives students, participants. I'm going to use the word participants because we got more than just the high school students, but they have opportunity to review them and maybe kind of, ooh, that one sounds really neat. I want to check that one out especially. And then the kickoff day, the challenge sponsors give a reverse pitch, which basically says, please pick my project and work on it, is basically what it is. And then in the past, when we were in person, people would then have a chance to sit, go around and talk to the various project sponsors. Again, because everything's going to be virtual this year, there'll be some slight modification of that, but there'll be that kind of resource still available. We're working on open office hours for the challenge sponsors and scheduled meeting times for people to sit, as well as we provide a Slack channel for each of the challenges. So, and then at the kickoff, we also encourage everybody who hasn't already signed up for Slack to sign up as the primary communication vehicle. In the past, we've tried to use email and Slack and any which way we could communicate, and found out that not all people were missing information, and that caused problems. So it's Slack and the HACC website are the two only communication vehicles used in the system. By the way, Sheila set up a EdCamp channel yesterday on Slack. You all made it in, and I assigned you all to that channel. So any other communications we have around this class will be done on that channel. So please check into it occasionally and keep an eye on that. I also want to. So then what happens is the teams are. A team comes together. They name a captain. They make sure everybody has a GitHub account and a DevPost account. And then they share the names of the people and their email addresses and the GitHub names, because you pick a little name on GitHub. And we share that with our tech administrator, who then sets up all the accounts and makes sure everybody has a GitHub account and a DevPost account for their team. At that point, then the team kind of goes off and does the research that Blaze discussed yesterday, does all the work, and then starts the development process and his process of how to kind of go through those sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 4 weeks. This year it's going to be 4 weeks again before the technical review, and then they'll have a week before the actual presentation review. The one problem we found is people were posting on DevPost but not on GitHub, or on GitHub but not DevPost, without understanding that they needed to. DevPost is kind of like the how am I doing and what are we doing process, where GitHub is just a repository for the raw code. And again, I will caution Blaze, because he's the only current team advisor on the call, but this is something that I've found I have to emphasize very strongly, is expecting the technical advisors to download your code and be able to run it on their system. And so now that we all know about IDE, we know that that's not going to work, and it's going to make it a real challenge to the technical advisors. I've had technical advisors say this code doesn't work at all, and it may be because they didn't have the proper environment, but mostly it's because the code is not deployed in a location that, so they want to look at the raw code. They do go and look through that, but they also want to see the application working. They also want to see the video of the application working, because sometimes it's an iPhone app or so forth. But the code has to be living somewhere and breathing somewhere and functioning somewhere. That's either on a phone or on a website. Excuse me, a website. And so yeah, there may be involved some cost on temporarily hosting something somewhere. Usually, most of us have those resources in our back pocket. My mom has one, so we can use hers, because you can put a temporary folder on it and use that. But they have to be out there in the world and accessible by the technical judge to see if he can make the code run too. Which means then you need to give the email address to that deployment location, and you also need to provide a username and password potentially. These things should be kept securely online and not to be open source.
Oh, Thelma, if I could just mention something, because you made me remember something that was very important last year.
Mm-hmm.
So especially for people who are participating in public high schools, right? So if you're thinking about having your schools do this, the DOE has very specific and strict rules about hosting websites or resources within the school's intranet and having it available outside. So what that basically means is that, like, for example, my team, we built something using Django, which sat on a web server. If we were to share that out to the judges, that would be a huge no-no in terms of DOE policy. So that was another logistical issue we had to deal with. We actually had to have a student stand up the server, a server at their house. And they had the judges reach the server at their house, and it didn't touch the school's network at all during that time. So, you know, we're just kind of, this is for me just kind of saying, like, you know, you kind of don't want to do things where it's going to cause your school to be like, hey, you had to break rules to do this. Maybe we shouldn't do HACC anymore, right? So yeah, we just want to make sure that, you know, you do kind of cover your bases about, hey, can I stand up a server here? And if not, where do I stand it up so people can access it, right?
And very good point, Blaze. I'm not asking anybody to break any rules. I'm asking them to be aware that those rules are there and they need to do something else then as a result.
Yes, and that's a really good point, Thelma, because we were like 3 ticks away from like making a bad decision before we checked the rule. So yeah, as you said, just always do your homework, and the answers will be on the table for you if you do so.
Well, and I will emphasize very strongly that unfortunately the rules and guidelines document from the HACC event is like 26 pages long. And I'm afraid most people just sign it and don't read it. I'm probably guilty of some of that myself, so I'm not trying to point any fingers at anybody. So also please be aware that there is a set of rules around how the HACC event works and what expectations and guidelines that at least if you're going to be an advisor, you should read, and they're pretty much the same every year. So if you want to go look at one of the previous year's guidelines, feel free to do that. And we just modify them for dates and times and, you know, any lessons learned in the previous year. And then finally, so then the code gets up to makes it to technical review. A team is not even invited to technical review if they don't post on GitHub. So if they don't post on DevPost and GitHub, they don't even get invited for a technical review. So please, you know, and I don't want anybody to be disappointed that they do 3 weeks of work and then fail to do the final push, and then, you know, didn't have somebody like Blaze making them push every 5 minutes, and then they go, oh, I was supposed to push, and then it's past the deadline, and we have to make the committee has to come together and make a decision whether to let them post their code or not. So, and then there's about we've actually allotted about 5 days. In the past, they used to freeze the code, and that was it. They couldn't work on it anymore, but we stopped that because that's not how it works in the real world. So what we ask for is that you have at least submitted a working version of your code. something that will, if the tech advisor did deploy it on his own, it would start functioning. So, and then from there, they make an evaluation. Each team gets 2 technical advisors because we want to have it an average of that. And then the top, depending on how many teams, the top X number of teams are invited to give a presentation at the judging ceremony. And that's what then leads you on to potentially winning the event. So, and then again, this year we're going to have because it's virtual, we're going to have on the Friday before the judging, we're going to schedule appointments for each of the teams to just test and check out their presentations. And then again, they'll be each made a co-host during their presentation time during the virtual, and they will be giving their presentation as Blaze did today. Okay, is that sufficient, Sheila?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next portion of today is going to be led by Blaze as well. He'll be taking you into a short activity before our break at about 10:30 or so. So if you could, it's all yours, Blaze.
All right. Today's activity is not going to be a super highly intense one, mostly because I do know from yesterday's session, I did hear a lot of feedback saying that there's usually a lot of small discussions that happen when the breakout rooms occur, which is absolutely fine. But I just kind of wanted to give something that was more of a jump off point, like a talking point, rather than having like an actual producible to come out of today's activity. So what I kind of wanted to do is, I hope you guys can still see my screen here. What I wanted to do today was that I wanted to talk about, certain strategies about how to implement, for example, like GitHub into something that you could use in the classroom, maybe as a unit or something. Like I said, it is something that a lot of people do highlight, saying, hey, this is a really handy skill to have. So one of the ones that you can go to, just kind of like one of the vanilla and tried and true ones that are out there, is the GitHub tutorial on they kind of give you a little structured explanation about things, how they work. And also what they do is that they have you do all of the true functionality of GitHub. But as you can see here, you're kind of using these kind of playful examples that are named specifically so people can make contextual kind of relationships with the name of the file and what this file represents, kind of thing like that. And they kind of just give you a little lesson about just, hey, this is how you use GitHub. Don't be so scared about it. So what I wanted to do is that for, the educators in the room, just maybe you guys can kind of look through this and you can kind of try and start to imagine ways that, hey, if you have some time for a supplemental unit, or, the hack is coming up, what are some ways that you can kind of get this and kind of teacherify it so you can implement it in the classroom, right? The feedback that I get back from my students a lot is that if I give them just a straight up document like this, some students absolutely love it. Some students don't, because they're more hands-on learners, right? They want to actually be doing the steps, and they want somebody there to be like, hey, to verify that they're doing something right, or maybe, hey, you're kind of going down the wrong path, maybe try do this, right? They kind of want that hands-on experience to be on rails. So what I found is that even if there's a resource out here that's pretty tight and concise about what things should be happening, some people just want that somebody kind of being the person looking over them and helping them out. So like I said, for today's activity, if you're okay with this, guys, I'm just going to put this in the chat right here. So just kind of take a look at that and maybe kind of just give some ideas about the ways that you could maybe do this in class, right? So I know that there's some middle school educators here and grade school educators. So hey, maybe even if you guys don't do Git specifically, right? maybe you can just do an idea about like conceptual, right? Like, hey, there's technologies out there. Hey, if you want to be somebody who does computer science, right? Like, how do you think everybody gets all their work to save in the same place, right? Or how do you think all these people work together, like, you know, when they're not in the same room, or you can't print out code and staple it together and that's the project, right? Maybe you can just take some fun or like conceptual ideas from this and just teach them out the idea of like, hey, this is how it works and this is what the workflow is, that the technology is out there, that people can work in tandem together. Yeah, so A to Z, odds and ends, just whatever you feel would be useful to you. Maybe you can just kind of talk about some of those strategies. Okay.
Blaze, would you mind if I steal the screen for a second? I have.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hang on a second here.
I'm going to stop share here.
Okay, let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, we can see that, or I can.
Okay, so what I did as well is on the HACC website, if you go to the home page, there's a link, educator resources. But as you see here, and I'll put this link in the chat when I'm done, there's a resource library for Slack, and then a link to the main website. And of course, you guys are already joined, so you don't need to worry about that one. And then I found a GitHub lab, which is also the same group as the one that you were using. I'm going to actually add yours. That's a very good one. And then there's an introduction to GitHub on that as well. And then the main GitHub website link is there as well. And then there's DevPost help, and then the main link to the DevPost. So I will copy and paste this into the chat box so that you guys can take a, cruise around on those links as well. Okay, that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Thelma. Appreciate it.
Blaze, please take that.
Oh, sure. I really don't have anything else on my screen to share.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so like maybe just take like 15 minutes to kind of talk about it, see how you feel. Hey, maybe you feel like this is something that's not even immediately relevant to you to teach in your classroom, and that's fine too. Like I just want to, just kind of get a feel of how everybody kind of thinks about the GitHub approach and trying to figure out a way to help students before they start out the HACC.